be that much development. I think it's very sad. Is it not?
Yeah.
Who else has a quote they want to share?
There have been great societies that did not use the wheel, but there have been no societies that did not tell stories.
You know, when I first started to travel to study with medicine men on reservations, you know, it was a long time ago before the internet, and a lot of reservations didn't even have a lot of electricity. But what they had every night was around the fire. Sometimes a garbage can was what the fire was in. The storytelling was amazing, and the laughter and the tears, and they were so alive. And now we go into our heated apartments and air-conditioned houses, and we all have our boxes, and we don't have that fire with people laughing and crying around it. You know? It's really sad sometimes.
I like nonsense. It wakes up the brain cells. Fantasy is a necessary ingredient in living. It's a way of looking at life through the wrong end of a telescope, which is what I do. And that enables you to laugh at life's realities.
What does that say to you?
Makes me feel a little bit more justified. Makes me feel like I'm going in the right direction.
I would never trust anywhere I'm at that doesn't have laughter. Whether it's a funeral, you know, which sometimes are the funniest places to be. But if it's a classroom, don't trust a teacher that doesn't have you laugh in his class. Don't trust an artist that can't laugh at their own work or laugh at other people's work. Don't trust people that can't laugh or cry. You want to know a great criteria? Don't go by their resume and their cover letter and all of the bullshit. Ask someone how much they laugh and cry. I don't mean smirk. I mean how many times they freaking weep. How many times they laugh so hard their ribs hurt and they make other laugh. That's the person to learn from and be around. That's the artist whose work I want. I want to see blood and tears and laughter in the piece of art. I want to look at that art and go, that person bled on that piece of art. And they laughed and they cried when they were making it. I want that piece. You know, people know what kachinas are? Does anyone know what a kachina is? Well, for the Zuni, the Hopi, and the Dine, which we call Navajo, but they hate that, they make these dolls. And their dolls are different spirits and different animal spirits, you know? And they're just incredible. When they're not using them in ceremonies, they have the kids play with it. So I go around and I find the kachinas that really call to me, you know? And I'll look at a kachina and they'll say, this kachina is $4,000 because it's made by Ed Whitehorse. And I'll look at another kachina that I like even more, and that one's $125 because it's made by an unknown artist. But a lot of times the unknown artist has bled and laughed on their work. How many people laugh and cry and bleed when they're doing their art? Tell the truth. Good for you. Never let anyone take that away. If they do, they're not wise. So, on page, what page are we? 11? So this is I do a retreat on where people actually create their own stories. I just got back a few weeks ago from Lewis and Clark in Oregon, where we spent 3 days learning actually the creation of a story, and then they had to create one and learn how to tell it. It was just awesome. But here are some teachings about creating a story and what stories are. We look at one, we work from archetypes. A lot of my stories have Li or Lo or the Zen master, not really a lot of names. And then we don't have to worry. The other thing that's really weird is being original. You know, that's just, you have to be original. Well, let me tell you, no one is original. What's original is how we do it. It's our original spin. Like if you were to actually read that Goha story, it wouldn't be anything like what I told. I stole that. Okay? So stealing other people's stories, borrowing other stories is perfectly okay. As a storyteller, as I said before, I love my stories. They're like children. It's like some people suggested stories, and I didn't really resonate with them. Another day, I would not like the stories I'm telling. When you're creating and telling a story, you have to love it. Number 4, unless you're telling a story in a shower, and I do that to practice, okay, you gotta engage the listener. The story has to be entertaining and you have to be entertaining. Does that make sense?
Yes.
How am I as a storyteller? Tell the truth.
Very entertaining.
Am I decent?
Awesome.
Damn right! You know how many millions of hours I practiced so that I don't have to practice? That's the key. Anyone hear what I just said? What did I say? The amount of time I practice so I don't have to practice. Doesn't make sense, the ego, does it? But what does that really mean? You can't be sloppy. You have to learn the techniques. You gotta learn your craft, right? But then you don't become a technician. You learn your craft so well. You practice that guitar for so many hours your fingers hurt. Playing what you're supposed to play. So eventually you don't have to look and you make your own music. Does that make sense? Okay. 5, and this is very important in storytelling. A lot of people, and on storytelling retreats, this is the killer. What people have is not a story. People are laughing, but they've been on my storytelling retreats. Is people have a good idea and no story. Okay? A story has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if you look on page 12 at the bottom, if you don't capture people at the beginning, you can never catch up. You understand what I'm saying? Your beginning got to bring things in. There's a book about great first lines of novels, which is awesome. Those of us that are writers, the first line of a poem, the first line of a story, I do novel writing retreats, the first line of a novel is so important, is it not? Not that it has to be brilliant and impressive, but it has to begin to build someone curious. You got to begin to bring them in. You can't afford to lose your reader. You can't afford to lose your listener. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm doing pretty well because there's only been about 8 times people have looked away, not wanting to hear the story. Of all the stories I told. That's pretty good. But I'm aware, if it got to be a lot in each story, I have to take a look at what's going on here, what's going on. Because it's my job to be engaging. Does that make sense? Okay. So now, a poor beginning, you can never make up for it. Here's what happens to a lot of stories. You get lost in the middle. Because you have an idea and you don't know where to go with it. Doesn't this happen with art too?
Yeah.
Okay? You have a great idea, a great inspiration, and you have this great beginning, you go, holy shit, what the hell am I doing?
All the time.
Right. And then you have to have an ending. A lot of stories just abruptly end or they go on forever. Now, in a Zen story, it's a little different. In the story I told, Time for Tea, and the story I told, The Horrible Hurricane and a Terrible Tornado, in an Oriental model of storytelling, they're very unsatisfying. They end abruptly. And a Zen or Tao story purposely ends abruptly because it's to make the listener think. Okay. Let's move on. The important thing to realize is that the story you're telling will grow and evolve. You will never tell a story the same. I was talking to a young man I mentor named Joyful Otter, and he was telling me at college he tells a lot of stories I tell. And I said, you don't tell any of the stories I tell. And he goes, no, I tell your stories. Well, he told the stories that were nothing like my stories. If anyone here was going to do any of the stories I told here, it wouldn't be the same. If I told any of the stories again, it wouldn't be the same. Because stories are alive. They keep growing and evolving as you grow and evolve. Does that make sense?
Yes.
On the list of stories, which we'll get back to, there were some stories that I put in and take out because I don't want to have to remember the story. I go, okay, what is that story? What do I tell? I'm going to be up before you. I want the stories that are connecting with me. So you say number 16. If it connects with me, go. That make sense?
Yes.
7, you have to be very clear, have clarity on what the teaching you want to give is, so that that teaching comes across. On page 14, and obviously here I changed it, I say 3 times in the creating. When I'm working on a story, and I'll probably get to the story I created for today, because I created it for today, I work on it 4 times before I tell anyone. That's 4 beginnings, middles, and ends. and then I have to tell it 6 times. The 6th time I tell a story, the story evolves then into a story. You know what I mean? That, and then it keeps evolving. But I don't think the first version I do is the story. I gotta write it. I write a lot of my stories first. I have to write it 4 separate times. On storytelling retreats, I make people write the story 3 times. From beginning to end, changing it, and then you gotta tell it 6 times before you get it. And if that doesn't make sense now, if you practice this, you'll understand what I mean. Number 9 is really important. There has to be some dynamic tension, some twist, some element of surprise. Like in that story, the horrible hurricane, terrible tornado, I build it up, and a horrible hurricane, terrible tornado. And Lee goes, and then he said, what just happened? There has to be some twist. 10, when you're performing, when you're telling a story, it is a performance. It's not conversational. Your energy gotta be big or small, Your energy has to be there to put it out so it engages the listeners. Okay, good, we've done this. We're up to another story. I'm tired of babbling. Okay, go back to your story list. And let's hear some suggestions for stories.
Coyote teaches the dragon a lesson.
Coyote teaches dragon a lesson. I haven't told that in a while. That's a really good story. Okay. So, all the animals, all the creatures of the land, air, and water are just getting so tired and annoyed because the dragon keeps bragging about how great he is. I'm greater than every animal of the sea and the water. I'm greater than any animal. And the animals can't stand it anymore because the dragon